everyone has a story, right? And everyone's at a different place along their journey. I know that I've been given a lot of grace in my life in terms of the evolution of that growth and coming to who I am and allowing the world and experiences and the people around me to shape the direction of that and who, where I grow into and who I become. And I think out of my own experience, right, that is something that helps me because I always want to extend that to other people, having been a person that was very isolated from the world, from other people, it gives me a piece of strength, right? You don't see a lot of white women, who are one white person among all Black people.
Hey podcast fam, it's your go-to leadership team coach and host, Jessy here, and I'm ready to shake things up. If you're also tired of outdated forms of authority and ready to rebel against the mediocrity of leadership we see today, you might have just found your spot. So join me in unleashing this next generation of leaders by embracing being just a bit too millennial. Let's redefine this thing together. Welcome to the episode 6 of Too Millennial. Can you believe it? We've reached the midpoint of season 1, and to celebrate, we have an extraordinary guest with us today, Ashley Williams. Ashley is one of the most badass HR organizational development leaders in the industry, period. And Ashley and I have let's be honest, our families pretty much despised each other. And then as I moved into adulthood and I started in my master's program, through Instagram, she kind of started to interact with me. And so after the murder of George Floyd, Ashley took to Instagram and really started to break down some of the systematic disparities and racism that she's seen in her life, and it's specifically from this white perspective. And so her insights resonated deeply with me. And I think there was this level of respect at that point after some of this interactions we had. And so at this time, I was also grappling with my own understanding of whiteness. And I kind of recognized at this point that racism was embedded in how I moved through the world. And to a degree, there was, I would say, a little sense of shame. I thought I was a good person. So why did, say, walking past a Black person bring almost this uncomfortable physiological reaction that to be honest, I didn't want to feel that, but I did. I carried that. So there was this idea of maybe that was a bad feeling to me. And seeing Ashley come on Instagram and talk about things in the way she's able to articulate it, her own experience really validated some of this response for me. It helped me confront some of that because she shared some of that. And so I really felt like, wow, not I'm bad, but this shows how deep society impacts us. This shows how deep it is. And it became data to me on how deep this impacts us. And this helped me accept some of that racism in a less personal way, which let me hold space to actually see more of it, to talk more about it. And as much as I'm a well-intended white woman, I have in my life brought certain harm in my actions. And in order to interrupt this harm rather than denying it, Ashley helped me accept that it's a part of our experience due to societal constraints. And so you probably as a leader, you're like, why does this matter to me? I actually invited Ashley here to discuss DEI due to all the reasons I just explained and the impact she's had on me. And I call it DEI, she calls it EDI. The E stands for equity, the D stands for diversity, the I stands for inclusion. And then there's obviously this focus of belonging as well. And so I invited her to talk about this due to her influence on me. And then as we were going through the interview, things kept surprising me in her responses. She seems to kind of seamlessly weave together these personal experiences and personal stories and how these things impact us individually. But then she also moves to this kind of macro view of systematic oppression and then zooms back in on the kind of these micro dynamics of high performing teams. And initially I was like thrown off a little bit, but upon reflection, it became very clear that this is masterfully done because EDI or DEI is really intertwined with everything we do. Like, it cannot stand on its own. It needs to be integrated. And that's the way we make meaningful change. And we can't have a meaningful conversation without considering it at an individual level, a team level, and then at a community or a societal level. I mean, as leaders, we often think of EDI as like this thing over here. It's separate from our day-to-day and how we drive things at tasks. And I think Ashley really shows how it's all connected, and that EDI impacts positively on our performance. And I'm a firm believer, and actually the research backs this up. Well, as long as there's an open environment. But the research backs up that diverse teams are more effective. Bringing together different ways of thinking, skills, and experiences fosters innovation and adaptability. And then if we think about it a different way, like, are we really going to argue against the value of making team members feel included and that they feel like they should belong? I do want to point out here, and Ashley brings it up too, that a key factor to these is this idea of psychological safety, which is an Amy Edmondson concept. I know I've brought her up in other interviews, but psychological safety, I want to make sure we're clear on the definition, is really this belief that one can speak up without the fear of punishment or humiliation. And actually, according to Google's research, psychological safety is the most critical factor in creating high performance teams. So before we dive into the conversation with Ashley, I want to give you all a quick heads up. I will be taking a mid-season break here. I'll be back in August with more fantastic guests. I know you're probably all going to miss me so much. And if you do, you can catch up on all the great content on my Instagram page at Coach Jessy Grossman. And so I bring you this episode on belonging, high impact teams, and everything in between. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our talk.
Yeah, so for those who don't know you, give us a brief introduction.
My name's Ashley Williams. I'm originally from Chicago. I live out here in California now. I've been doing HR work for about 15 years, but my real passion, the thing that kind of started me out down the path of HR, is my passion for EDI work. I have a master's in industrial organizational psychology, where I focused on diversity issues through that lens. But I like the broader conversation of diversity as well, meaning, how do different people with different strengths and thought processes and upbringings and worldviews come together and create synergies in order to create really high performing teams. And I think it starts foundationally with this idea of feeling a sense of belonging or inclusion to where people can be their authentic selves and really embrace and live into those strengths in order to get to a place where you can find those synergies between people, right? If there's not psychological safety in an organization, then it's really hard for people to be their authentic selves, bring their full selves, bring all of their strengths, and find those synergies to create high performing teams. So I've spent a lot of my career kind of focused on that and working with people, trying to constantly understand people. I like to say people will people, people are people. And it's always something new and different.
And what have you learned in this process?
Oh my gosh. I've learned so much. I think I've been called a social justice warrior. I have some pretty radical, I guess. People call it radical. I don't think it's radical, but I have some pretty radical worldviews, my thoughts around race and gender and some of these different marginalized communities. And one thing that's been really interesting to me, because I grew up in a very wealthy white community, and it was really kind of like a West Side Story kind of thing, because, I was a troubled teen. Jessy probably remembers, had a lot of challenges in my family. And, I found myself, living in all Black communities and having some experiences. I lived in Cincinnati from 99 to 2001. And if anybody remembers, this is a long time ago, maybe for some of your listeners, but they had race riots. And that was an experience that really, I think, shaped me in some of my worldview, right? And so that has also, led to me being a member of the NAACP, right? Getting very involved in activist types of organizations. And I think one of the things at this old age of mine now that I'm realizing is that my kind of like Malcolm X mindset, I've had enough experience now inside of organizations to realize that there's really this Martin approach that needs to happen. And as much as I'd like to come in there with my, militant radical beliefs and, kind of push those on to people and, say the right words and change people's minds, that is just not realistic when we're talking about inclusion and belonging and the true continuum and diversity of people and worldviews and thought processes and upbringing. So I would say that, the last few years, something I'm really learning is, what does that look like? What really works when we're talking about peopling?
I mean, I think me and you struggle with that a little bit. Refinement is not our strength. Like, we want to go in there like that competitive, like intense personality. I think we kind of share that.
It's one of my Clifton strengths is competition. It's my number one. How do I use that strength, but in a way where it's directed that I want to compete with you in a way that makes you better. And I want you to reciprocate that competition with me in a way that makes me better because we're better together. And I see so much unhealthy competition in the world. And a lot of it is the dynamics of these power structures, right? You think about marginalized communities, there's often this perception that it's a zero-sum game. There's only so many spots for women. There's only so many spots for Black people. There's only, right, at the top. And so in order to get there, I have to tear you down in order to get ahead. And that is something that we're indoctrinated with in terms of the social construction of gender, of race. And, when you start to deconstruct those things, it's also just our society, right? Our society, capitalism, that is all about competition. Who's going to be the best? Which business is going to be the best? And if we really want to be conscious people, we have to look at those things and start to deconstruct them before we can really envision something different. And, that's something I'm really learning, that, there's a way to be competitive that is supportive, that builds high performing teams, and that doesn't play into this zero sum mindset. I can't tell you how many times I've been inside organizations where you have some really, really smart people and they have forgotten that the competition is out there and they've started to compete with each other. Oh, well, this person's incompetent. Oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing. Oh, this whole department is not doing the right thing. And it's this place of judgment instead of this place of, I want our team to be the best. And it takes every single individual on this team working together to find those synergies to create a high-performing team. But we seem to stay focused on non-growth mindsets sometimes. Like, that's just how they are. They're just incompetent. That's like a finality. And it doesn't allow for that evolution over time that I know has happened in my life.
But yeah, I mean, it's like something that came to my mind when we were talking about this is this idea of like competition versus comparison. And I think that a lot of times when we think we're in competition and it's making us better, in reality, it's egoic. And that we can only feel good when someone else is doing bad. I fall into that category, and it's something that I work all day long on, which is how do you just intrinsically feel good about yourself without having it to be in comparison to what other people are doing. And that's really hard for me. And I think on teams, it's like, well, if everyone on the team is really good, then I'm not special. It's this like need to belong but feel special. I think a lot of times our incentive systems tend to like, only one person can get the promotion, and then we wonder why people are, cutting each other down. Well, incentives are off. At this moment, it feels as though we're moving backwards a bit when it comes to DEI, or you said EDI. What are you seeing with these new narratives that are popping up, and what are your thoughts around it?
Maybe it's an unpopular belief. I'll tell a different story. We can get political, right? I will never forget. I'm married to a Black man. I'll never forget when President Obama was running for office, and my husband and I went to vote, and he had this moment where he was just saying, "Oh man, this is such a important moment in my life." I certainly appreciated that and took a moment to acknowledge that. And then I said to him, I want you to also just be kind of prepared that I don't think our country's ready for this. And he's like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I'm like, "Well, I think the Black people in this country have been ready for this." But I think that there's a larger part of the population that may not be ready. And if you kind of look at what's transpired, I feel like there was a lot of backlash when President Obama did become president and he was elected, right? And I liken that to be kind of similar, but on a new scale to what we're kind of seeing, since George Floyd, right? I remember when George Floyd was murdered, and that time period. I'm glad that social media and the access to information through technology is really putting the spotlight on some of these things. These are things that I've been aware of long before that, just having lived in Black communities and watching the movement of police through communities and watching, disparate treatment and racism. And so I definitely acknowledged, like, hey, I'm grateful that more people are now, their interest is piqued, they're looking at this. But we need to make sure that this isn't just a moment in time. And so when we talk about, hey, is it kind of losing some steam, right? A lot of corporations that put a lot of money behind EDI at that time are kind of pulling back and reducing these things. And, that was kind of what I feared. And that's because it's truly systemic. We are all living inside of a system, an ecosystem, much like I was talking about earlier, the evolution of people and experiences that help to shape our worldview and who we are. And unfortunately, the backlash that we're seeing is kind of a byproduct of all of that. You think about how polarized our country is right now, not only in the geopolitical sense, but you see it showing up in organizational life as well. I had rolled out a diversity program long before 2020 at my organization. People were very supportive. They loved some of the things that we were doing. We were highlighting different people, trying to make different employees feel special by recognizing them, by seeing them. and trying to create a space where they could be their authentic selves. When 2020 happened, now some of these same people that were really excited about what we were doing and were really on board, they had a problem with it now.
That's
And
surprising.
And, you know,
I
I
would have thought
think,
they'd been like, look, we're already doing it, you know? Look at
right,
us, we're ahead of times.
there is a lot of fear that starts coming up when we start talking about these things. And it's mostly with white people. You know, you want to call it white fragility. There's a number of different factors that play into it. But again, if we create more space for Black people in organizational life and we don't continue to hold them down with oppressive systems of, you know, the industrial prison complex or, you know, the way that police do their work, then what happens to me? Especially if I am sitting in a position of power. And I'm not saying these are conscious thoughts that happen for people. This is really our subconscious mind. And this also plays into this Malcolm Martin approach that I've really been thinking through in my life, because one of the things when I was doing my master's thesis that I was really focused on is there's some psychological principles that talk about how most people believe themselves to be good people. What happens is because we do learn, we are indoctrinated that racism is bad. People who are racist, they're bad people. And so when there's language or when there are things that happen in the world that come into conflict with that belief that I'm a good person and make me feel like if you call me or suggest to me that I'm a racist, I know that racism and people who are racist are bad. That comes into conflict with this idea that I am a good person, and I have cognitive dissonance now. And so the reaction or the result is now I feel that I have to defend myself. I have to dig my heels in. And a lot of times that looks like some of the backlash that we're seeing. We don't want this woke shit.
So you think it was like when at first you were doing it, they were just seeing it as like recognition and learning, and then all of a sudden when they started seeing it, it almost they had this like physiological response, like I'm being attacked.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. And what I learned through that experience, the way that I got people back on board with it was taking more of a Martin approach. And we started talking about belonging. Because when you even say the word diversity, equity, inclusion, those are really coded words, right? As much as we're indoctrinated with ideas about, you know, race or gender, we're also indoctrinated, or words become very coded. Language really matters. When we started talking about belonging, that was something that was neutral enough of a word that it didn't evoke that visceral physical reaction that you were describing. That was something that everybody could relate to. Everybody wants to feel like they belong. Does it get us to the same end goal? Well, it certainly moves us in that direction, because what happens when you use the word diversity or equity or any of these words that are very coded is you're actually a lot of times creating division, because you get that backlash from a segment of the population or from a segment of the organization that then is working to sabotage the efforts of making progress. If you're willing to say, I still have this same goal, that I want to help people to make progress in terms of ultimately EDI, but I want to use language that doesn't put people on the defense, that doesn't make people feel attacked, but it all gets us towards this space where we are going to value every single individual and we are going to allow them to be themselves, and we are going to help them to also, what you mentioned earlier, feel special for just being who they are, then you can really get to a lot of the things that you ultimately want when you're using more coded language or a more militant approach.
I mean, I'm a millennial, so I want to feel special all the time.
and I think we all do. I think that that's just honest.
What are some of the red flags? I don't know if that's the right word. What are some of the red flags when it comes to organizations not creating a culture of belonging?
The biggest thing is level at the organization of people's ability to appropriately deliver and receive feedback.
I never thought of that one. For this type of work. I mean, we work on that with like leadership and learning. I didn't think about it in regards to EDI or DEI.
There are people who it is so hard for them to hear feedback, right? And it does bring up kind of this defensiveness, right? Like an insecurity about the things I mean, in organizations, it's easy to get everybody to agree. We all have things to work on. Almost everybody will agree to that. But when we talk about something that you may have an opportunity with, like how do you respond? That really measures the level of psychological safety, but it also, to me, feedback equals growth. If people are to grow and move forward and help to create a culture and an environment where there is psychological safety and where there is belonging, then we have to get comfortable with feedback because that's par for the course. And then I would say helping people and an organization to adopt a learning mindset. That allows us to take on a persistence about where we're going, right? Jessy, I know you know this. You've done a lot of this with your consulting work. Organizational change and culture is hard. It's messy and it takes a really long time. So you have to get people on board with this idea of, hey, we understand where we're trying to go and we don't exactly know how to get there, but we are going to be open and willing to try some things and then look at them and say, how did that work? And there's going to be times where it's like, whoa, that didn't work. But we're not going to stay stuck in that or beat one another up. We're going to say, okay, it didn't work. That's a great learning opportunity for us. What can we learn from why that didn't work that helps inform whatever we try next? And then we have that persistence that it takes along that path, along that evolution to stay in the fight, to stay in the game.
One of the things I've seen stop people from thinking and taking action from a progressive growth mindset is this idea that we don't really know what a culture looks like when we get there. Like we can't envision the future state. So for example, I was on a board and I was saying I want to be the most progressive board that there is, that no one's ever done before. So we're trying to do something that doesn't exist. There's no model for us. That was really hard for people because they're saying, but I don't know what that looks like. Tell me what it looks like. And I'm sitting here saying, it's not been done, so we don't know. But I think of you as a visionary. What are your hopes and visions for this next generation?
I love what you said, but I can only imagine what the other board members felt when you said that because we're so uncomfortable with ambiguity. So is there an end goal? To your point, you can't envision what it would actually look like to be in a spot different than where you are. But to have the courage to want to move in that direction and have new experiences as you go that evolve you as an individual, evolve the organization. But I just don't think there's like an end goal but people want that. There's security in that. That feels good. Okay, we'll know that we have arrived when we get here, right? Well, what happens when you get there? Then you stop. It goes back to that growth mindset. What would I like to see? Ideally, are we talking about realistically or I told you, I mean, I still am pretty Malcolm X, Angela Davis about things. But I think realistically, what I would like to see is the evolution about how we think about work. I think there's a lot of old adages that we've inherited from baby boomers, Gen X generation that are still living inside organizations. Things like leave your problems at the door, put your head down and work. That's how you get ahead. Your value to the organization is if you hold on to all of this knowledge and you are a single point of failure and the only person who can actually do your job. And so they need you, right? And so reimagining and re-envisioning work that takes a totally different look at, how people actually are, right? We are emotional. Life happens. And it's very unrealistic to ask somebody to come in and put their head down and work. We need to learn how to be empathetic, accommodating, understanding, and more trusting. How do I get comfortable with sharing my knowledge, sharing my skills, sharing my information with other people inside of an organization and not feel threatened by that? One of the things I've always said is I love to hire people that are way smarter than me and way more talented than me. So many people are afraid of that because of that competition mindset, right?
Oh, and me included. I mean, as much as I say that, intellectually I know that's how you're supposed to do, but it's still hard.
Yeah.
Because,
No.
we've all been taught that you're only as good as the answer you can give to the world. And if you have no answer, it feels very hard to understand and wrap your head around your value.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to do a part 2 just on letting go of the egoic self.
Oh my gosh, no kidding. It is. And your honesty is so refreshing because it's not easy. And I think it goes back to wanting to feel special. You first have to have the courage to do that, to say, okay, this is scary because maybe I won't be special if I hire somebody smarter and more talented than me, but I'm going to have the courage to do it anyway because I can recognize, like you said, intellectually that that's the right thing. And then you do that. And then it's about recognizing that in and of itself makes you special because most people can't do that. And, one of the things that I've learned is, hey, that makes me really valuable to an organization because I can find really smart, talented people and bring them onto a team. That's valued in HR, but at, even at the manager level, I can build a team of really smart and talented people. I mean, that's what every leader should be aiming for because as a leader, we should be evaluated not on our own individual work, but on our ability to lead a team of people who are doing great work. But
Yeah.
it takes
I
some
mean, I
courage.
think it's a really important distinction to make. I think that our whole lives, we are taught that we are valuable by having the right answer. We're taught we're valuable through our expertise and our knowledge. And then when you become a leader, that's just not enough. Because at the end of the day, it's about how do you leverage talent? How do you design tasks and design projects that leverages talent and that motivates a team? And you standing there as an expert is not going to motivate your team. It's not going to make your team better. You knowing who has the right expertise in the right places and how you use that in the right situations, like that's more going to make you a better leader. You understanding how to read the room, you understanding how to effectively navigate dialogue, how to make things more explicit for the team, how to communicate, impact and Those are the things that make you successful, not your expertise. But no one's ever taught us that that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I just want to point out, everything that we've just been talking about, I think you said it really well about, what we've learned and what really makes somebody a good leader. Everything that we've talked about, we didn't at one point use the word diversity or equity or inclusion.
True.
We didn't use any of that coded language, but what is the byproduct of not feeling threatened by somebody else who's smart and talented? If I can really get comfortable with that, I'm not going to be having the backlash and digging my feet in, when I feel like my power is being threatened.
Wow. I'm gonna have to sit with that. I think it's a really powerful point.
When we talk about reimagining the workplace and having it be a space where it's not about ego, it's truly about being humble enough to recognize other people's strengths, other people's talents, and not feel threatened by them. That helps us make progress with EDI.
I invited you to come here and to talk about belonging or EDI, and at the end of the day, we're just talking about, being better people, growing, learning. And those are really the core components of high performance. So if we want to get better, and if we want to have a culture of belonging, those two things go hand in hand. You aren't sacrificing anything for belonging. In reality, you are making the workplace more effective.
There's a lot of fear, right? Because if we rolled the tape back and just had that whole conversation again, but we used words like, we want to create an equitable space where everyone has equal opportunity to progress and move forward, which is really what we're saying when we say, hey, I don't want to feel threatened by somebody else being smart and being more talented than me. I want them to have the same opportunity. It makes us all better, right? Or equity, giving more people opportunity and access to move ahead makes us better. But we feel threatened by that, and we feel scared of that. There's a great book that talks about this. It's called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And, she's really talking about how much talent in the world have we missed out on because that person didn't have access or opportunity. That's true in the world, and it's true in organizational life, right? But if we change the language in which we're talking about it so that we can make more people comfortable, then we can get more people on board with moving towards that high-performing team. That's something everybody wants. Nobody's threatened by the idea of a high-performing team. But if I say inclusion, if I say equity and opportunity and access for everybody, we just kind of stalled our progress because of that coded language and what it brings up in people.
Yeah. I think what I'm thinking about, like, how do we move forward and like not whitewashing our language and trying to make everyone super comfortable, but also using language that helps people get uncomfortable. But how do we do that in like a space that's safer? I don't even know, but that's what's coming to my mind right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, absolutely a component of, ultimately where I want to see us go, people are going to have to get real uncomfortable. And there's no way we can even approach that until we've made some progress around creating a space where everyone feels like they belong and they are safe, so that when we start to feel uncomfortable, we can come back to the security that comes with feeling a sense of belonging.
When you think of a team, like belonging is so like, oh yeah, of course you have to have belonging to have a high performing team. That's why I like thinking about it from a team perspective, because no one's ever going to say, oh, psychological safety and belonging is bad for a team. So we're going to jump into my segment called Jessy's Jolt of Insight. For people who know, we're taping this on a Saturday, so I don't want to take all of Ashley's Saturday up. She also has a life. List 3 words that would describe your state of mind as a leader right now.
Hopeful, steadfast, authentic.
What's your favorite millennial quality about yourself?
Say that there's other generations who might be labeled with this more, but I think it starts with millennials, but a desire for progress, right? So progressive would be the word.
How about me? What's your favorite millennial quality about me?
I don't know if this is a millennial quality, but my favorite thing about you is your refreshing honesty.
Thanks. What's one thing you want to change people's mind about?
Feedback's how we grow.
I love that. Well, did we miss anything?
I've known Jessy since we were little kids, and I think we reconnected as adults and found all of these common interests and similar worldviews and similar passions in our work. And that's been really fun and exciting.
I weirdly started tearing up when I started thinking about like me and our relationship. For those who don't know Ashley was this like incredible tennis player in high school, and like this intensity, but so much pressure. And like you said, you were this like troubled teen. And I think what made me tear up was this idea that like you were the person I like wasn't supposed to look up to, right? Like back then. But then now I think about today and the person I look up to and I really like admire, and it's you, right? And it really like it makes me tear up because it just shows that, yeah, like I don't know, people we admire just come in such unique ways to us, and we change so much as people over time, and it's so amazing. Like your troublemaker tendencies is like I love it.
No, thank you so much. I mean, that means a lot to me. It's such a beautiful thing because to reconnect, with you, has been really wonderful for me, feeling such isolation and like such an outsider in my family, and to feel like, no, this person who I grew up with, we have these things in common that make me feel a connection and not feel so alone. And gosh, doesn't it feel good to just feel like you can belong and be yourself? And you give that to me. And so I too am really grateful. The only other thing I'd like to say is nothing is more energizing for me than being able to talk with like-minded people about something that I'm really passionate about. And it can be really lonely. It can be really isolating. And to know that, there are other people out there fighting the good fight, it creates a sense of belonging. And it helps you to endure in the work, be kind of refueled in terms of my efforts, and to feel really energized in knowing, that we have people out there like you that are doing things like this to make the world a better place and grow as an individual as well, right? So yeah, I just want to thank you for that, Jessy.
Well, of course, your way of speaking and way of thinking has really made a big impact on me. And so I thought it was critical to bring you on due to the impact that you've had on me and helping me understand my whiteness, my own shame, my own racism, in a way that I can do something with it. And I just really appreciate how you can really cut there without creating this defensiveness. You call it Malcolm X, but I was like, yes, it spoke to me. So don't ever forget that.
Well, thank you. I think it's a mutual admiration club. I do recognize as a white woman, that I do not understand the lived experience of Black people. But I'm raising a little Black girl, and she's my favorite little Black girl, and I want the world to be a great place for her. And I have always felt convicted about, using my privilege in order to try to make the world a better place. And I know that my target audience is, working with other white people who are open to it. And it's pretty rare that I've found someone who's really open to it. And again, it's lonely when you're really trying to share, your own experiences or knowledge that you've gained with people who are not open to it, and to continue to suit up and do that in the world. And, you've been very open and in wanting to seek out some of that stuff. And I think, in that way, we've made one another better. And that's the power of what we were talking about today, right? The openness to hear feedback and to deliver feedback in a way that makes us better together. And to me, nothing's more powerful.
To wrap up this episode, I wanted to read a quote that might help you think about how you can put this episode into action in your own life. Quote, "The micro reflects the macro, and vice versa. Fibonacci patterns show up from space to cauliflower. The tiniest, most mundane act reflects the biggest creations we can imagine." And this is by Kat Aaron, and it's from the book Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, who's inspired a lot of the work I do in team effectiveness. So, what can we do with this information? Well, lucky for you all, attached to this, you can find in the show notes, I actually have a playbook for how do you give feedback with empathy and love, but also accountability. So check that out, and I'll see you all in mid-August. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Two Millennial. If you found yourself nodding along, you know the drill. Smash that subscribe button wherever you're tuning in. And if you want a daily dose of leadership wisdom with a sidekick of quirky parent jokes, catch me on Instagram at Coach Jessy Grossman. But hey, if you're serious about leveling up yourself, your team, head over to zlncoaching.com, where we have great tools, resources, and case studies that will help you unlock your potential and enhance your team's resilience and performance. Because here's the truth. When we don't invest time in building our own leadership skills and the skills of those around us, problems fester. We feel disconnected, and it's just so hard to get work done. So if you need an executive coach, a sounding board, an offsite facilitator, a team consultant, get in touch. Thanks for hanging out with me on Two Millennial. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep growing.
You can still convince the people that what that action you took or that thing that you said did not make that person belong. You don't have to understand racism. If you're truly committed to belonging, then you don't have to understand why what you said made that person feel like they didn't belong. You just have to know that it did and what to do differently next time. But if we have a shared goal, then we have to be willing to change our behavior. And if you change your behavior, cool, that's all I really care about. I'm not trying to change your mind and become some leftist militant Malcolm X, Angela Davis supporter like I am. But you can stop doing harm.
We have to remember, changing people's behavior also changes their mind. Yeah. So sometimes it's like, it goes both ways. If someone's like doing harm in a group, this behavior is harmful, it's inappropriate, I'm going to hold you accountable for it, and we're not going to have this behavior anymore. But at the end of the day, that could change someone's mind.